Welcome to our work-based learning professional learning series for New York City Public Schools. My name is Larry Williams, and I'm joined by my colleague Joe Pinto. And today we want to talk about managing partnerships between high schools and industry partners. Today's presentation might seem a little different, but we think it serves our overall goal of supporting and empowering work-based learning coordinators as they develop and or maintain their WBL programming. For this presentation, we want potential industry and intermediary partners to join our intended audience of WBL coordinators as we discuss what effective partnerships can look like through intentional collaboration. As we all know, collaboration between educational institutions and the industry is critical for the success of our students, communities, and in the future for our future economy. However, managing such partnerships can be challenging and it requires careful planning and execution to achieve positive outcomes for all stakeholders involved. Effective partnering is a crucial element to building a pipeline that carries students from classroom learning to real world experience. In a world that's constantly changing and industries that are constantly updating, your potential industry partners can impart key information that students will need to navigate the real world. They'll also serve as great thought partners as you're putting together your curriculum and scope and sequence. If internships are the final phase of the work based learning experience, then insight on curriculum development and mentorship opportunities become vital because as students step into their internships, they aren't operating from a blank state. It will be a new experience, but through the partnership, it would have provided much needed context. It's also important to create and sustain effective partnerships with industry partners by clearly defining roles, responsibilities, and expectations for all stakeholders, while also leaving room for spontaneity and collegiality. Defining the roles, responsibilities, and expectations for everyone involved is not only important, but it's powerful. Understanding the initiative and having the ability to know your role gives you the ability to craft the role within the boundaries of the initiative. Opening up the lines of communication and establishing regular communication builds trust and creates a space where you can both share feedback on how the partnership is progressing.
We've put together these 7 tips for new industry partners, knowing, of course, that there are more than seven. In many, many years of working with industry partners, gathering data, observing their relationships with schools, observing successful work based learning programs, we have seen trends. We have seen things that are consistently the case in highly effective school industry partnerships, and we've distilled them down to these 7, which we'll talk about in a moment at greater length. I do want to mention, Larry said a moment ago that this particular session is going to feel a little bit strange or a little bit different. And it's because, in my mind anyway, it's in part because we are actually gearing this information toward industry partners themselves rather than toward the school-based staff members who will be working with industry partners. And we do hope that industry partners will uh, see this presentation, will have access to this material if they so choose, if they want it, if you and they feel it would be helpful. But there are a few other reasons why we decided to really speak to industry partners in this session. One is that there are a lot of materials out there that speak to the ins and outs of effective partnerships that really kind of some are more didactic than others. Some are very, very, instructive. You must do this. You must do this. Others leave a lot more room for school by school interpretation. But the point is that there are a lot of materials out there. We've created a lot of materials as well about what to think about, what to do when partnering with industry. So this felt like an opportunity to do sort of more than that kind of same old approach. Also, we understand that there are going to be large differences in the setup of partnerships from school to school. We know, for example, that future ready NYC schools who will be watching this will be working with their industry partners largely through CBO intermediaries, whereas other schools might be having much more direct and frequent contact with the industry partners themselves. So we couldn't really put together a session that said, this is how you work with partners, because we know that there will be as many approaches or as many sets of opportunities and constraints as there are schools out there doing this work. And then I would say another reason why we chose to take this approach is that we do feel that there is, as much as we hope that industry partners will receive this content and have access to this session, we do feel that there's tremendous benefit potentially to work-based learning coordinators and other school-based staff in going through this information again, right? This is largely stuff you already know because you are actively partnering right now, but it's also not the kind of stuff you tend to think about this explicitly in the day to day. So stopping and saying, what are our expectations of partners? What do we think good partners do? And how do we set things up so that our partners can deliver those things? That's important to do from time to time. And hopefully this session will be beneficial to you if you're a school-based staff member watching, in helping you think about, from the partner's point of view, what is effective on their side of things and how you can sort of, set up the bowling pins so that they can knock them down going forward.
So the first is understanding the school's culture and priorities. Each school has its own unique culture, priorities, and approach to education. Take the time to learn about the school's values, goals, and expectations, and try to align your partnership's goals with them. It's essential for industry partners to understand the priorities and cultures of our New York City public schools. Partnering with the school will be more than an acknowledgement or an agreement between school administration and industry liaisons. Cultures and themes are very important to acknowledge.
I think that you can also flip this and say, from the school standpoint, you could just as easily say understand the industry partners' culture and priorities. I think one thing that industry partners should know and understand is that a lot of schools are going to be doing that already. A lot of schools are racking their brains to understand what's going on in your organization, what you value, what kind of work happens there, in order to best align the things they ask for and the types of work-based learning that they try to pursue with you with those things. They may not be doing it actively, they may not be doing it fully, but if there is this mutual process of understanding what the other brings to the table and how the other operates, then really what you're doing is finding where those things meet or intersect.
Communicate clearly and frequently. Effective communication is critical to a successful partnership. Make sure to communicate your expectations, your goals, and timelines clearly and frequently, and be responsive to any questions or concerns from the school. Clear and frequent communication is the cornerstone of any successful partnership. Industry partners should have open lines of communication with school officials, with teachers, and students to ensure everyone is on the same page.
I feel that this is an especially poignant slide, actually, in this particular day and age, because I think something is happening to communication, to genuine communication, where it feels as though conversation, actual conversation, where you say what you have to say, you listen, and then what you say next in very much involves what you've heard, and you're ready and able to sort of adjust your position, your thinking, your what you're going to ask for, what you're going to offer on the basis of what you've just heard. That all seems to be getting a lot, for some reason, a lot harder nowadays. And so when we say communication, what we really mean is this sort of hopefully not outmoded just quite yet, but this way of both speaking and listening, where any good conversation cannot happen without the presence of all the participants. Otherwise, it's just mutual monologuing. So, yeah, when we say communication, this is what we're talking about, and it goes for the partners as much as the schools, right? Say your piece, bring what you have to bring, and listen actively, and bring your full self, and be honest, and be empathic as well.
I'm also going to add that I think in order to communicate clearly before communicating with schools or even communicating with industry, I think we all have to be on the same page in terms of communication. There are times I think with partnerships, especially where Group A makes the decision, they make the decisions in terms of an agreement to the partnership between industry and schools. Implementation is probably done by Group B from the industry and from the schools. But if clear communication isn't trickled down to those two groups, how does an effective partnership take place? So just making sure that on all levels, the information that needs to be communicated is communicated.
Yeah, and I would add, I'm sort of glad that we've stopped and taken a little bit of extra time with this slide because I think it's an important one. There are some who would look at this slide and amend it and say what it really should read is communicate clearly, frequently, and politically. There's this sense that the work-based learning coordinator, any role that sits at the intersection, at the nexus of a number of relationships, is a political role, and in a way, it is, in the sense that you cannot fail to take into account how the listener is going to hear you, right? I think it's a different kind of communication. We said be honest and be thorough, but also, you're not just sort of blabbing into a vacuum. You're sort of, you speak in order to be heard, and there are ways of saying things that will get the message more or less heard by the particular listener. So taking into account the sensibilities and the sensitivities of the conversation partner or the recipient of the message is really, really important. I would not I would not interpret the word political to mean, calculated or theatrical. I don't think that's the case. I think some partnership coordinators and work-based learning coordinators kind of like turn themselves inside out trying to communicate the exact right way, and they feel sort of hamstrung in what they can say because the wrong thing will compromise the relationship. I'm not talking about, I don't think that's a healthy form of being political, just thinking about who am I talking to,
Right.
and where are they coming from. That's a different sort of a thing than just being aware, being honest and expressive, but also kind of knowing who you're talking to.
Respecting students' privacy and confidentiality. And I think this one might speak for itself in that student privacy is of the utmost importance, and any information shared with you about students should be treated with confidentiality. Making sure to adhere to all applicable privacy laws and regulations and obtain necessary permissions before collecting or sharing any student data. And that goes without saying, industry partners, they must respect the privacy and confidentiality of our students. Our students are the number one priority. Any partnership should comply with all FERPA laws. All that to say, to respecting their privacy and confidentiality, but just being mindful about the way that we speak about students in both arenas, in both the industry space and in the school space.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really excellent point. I think thinking as consistently and rigorously and committedly as we do of students as kind of like recipients of service can sort of can collapse their complexity. And I think it's really, and not just students, I think when we're speaking about students, when we're speaking to each other,
Yeah.
right? Your partner is somebody who, they're wearing a suit and they're sitting at a desk and they're about to make a decision that's going to affect your school, but they also woke up this morning and maybe they didn't sleep well last night, or maybe they had an argument with a spouse, or maybe like everybody has stuff going on.
Right.
And so speaking about and to people as people is really important.
Providing meaningful and relevant experience. The best partnerships are those that provide students with hands on, real world experiences that are meaningful and relevant to their academic and career goals. Work closely with the school to design activities and projects that are engaging, challenging, and aligned with the school's curriculum. And partnerships should provide students with meaningful and relevant experiences that will help them prepare for the workforce.
I think one important thing for schools to be aware of as they're thinking about this tip, this message to partners, is how to right size what you ask partners for, in the sense that it is possible to say, well, the partners are the experts in the partner stuff. And so I'll just leave it to them to put this activity together. They know how to do it better. Like, this is their wheelhouse, so they'll do the whole thing. And it's possible for partners to feel under collaborated with, or it's possible for the resulting activity to be pedagogically, I don't want to say weak, but pedagogically not as strong as it would be if somebody who is an educator was a true collaborative force right next to the partner throughout the planning and implementation. Conversely, it's possible to sort of take the opposite tack and just kind of babysit the partner a little too much and tell them how things should go, and tell them, sort of over represent the pedagogical expertise that you have, right? You're an educator, you know what works for teenagers, but to bring that to the fore so much that the partner feels a little bracketed, or a little hemmed in terms of like their own creativity in putting experiences together, is also not the way to go. So all of that, as I said, this slide to me is a little bit of a watchword to schools as well, making sure that you kind of hit that sweet spot where the partner can really do their thing and do it well because it's what they know, but you're right there alongside them doing your thing well and what you know.
Well, I think it, and this is where I'm going to bring in an example a little bit. I think just like the slide alludes to, in that partnership, it's hands on. You can't be hands off, and being hands off is where you are passing it on for the industry to handle, where you're just saying that, you know what, okay, industry has this experience, they'll take care of it. So, for example, if public schools has a partnership with Google, and they have a coding program, a computer skills a coding program, I think you would be doing yourself a disservice by saying, okay, we have a partnership, we'll just send our students to Google and they'll handle that part. Because there's so much information that you can glean from just conversation with industry. What is the skill level of the students that will be taking these courses? I need to know all of this information before designing something. So if you leave me alone as the designer for industry, I can either hit the mark or maybe I'll just miss everything altogether.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I hear this sometimes when there are schools that are new to career connected learning and they're trying to figure out what kind of programs they want in their school. And there is this dichotomy, sometimes it's a false dichotomy, that I've heard referred to as buy or build, right? Do I build a vocational or a CTE program in my school? That takes a lot of resources, a lot of time, hiring new staff, etc. Or do I buy one off the shelf? Essentially, do I find an outside partner that does all the training, does all of like that, they do anything that this program is going to do,
Mhm.
and it happens all outside of the building and I can just pay for it and outsource it. Of course, that's not going to be the kind of program that ends up getting CTE approval, but it is an equally valid and relevant way to do career connected learning for students. The problem is that, there's not that balance of expertise in either equation, to your point, Larry, right? I think that the buying just kind of like sells your own expertise as a school down the river, everything you know about teaching, everything you know about students. Um, but building and being really, exerting a little bit too much ownership about the building and taking on more yourself and kind of struggling to really let partners in and take ownership of big pieces, that disregards what they bring to the table.
Be flexible and adaptable. Schools operate on a different schedule and timeline than most businesses, and unforeseen circumstances can arise. Be flexible and adaptable, and be willing to adjust your plans or schedule to accommodate the school's needs. I think with any partnerships, they need to be flexible and adaptable to changing to any type of changing circumstance. I think we had the one of the clearest examples that we have was the COVID-19 pandemic, where many partnerships had to adapt to remote learning. You know, businesses had to think about different. I think this was a place where both businesses and schools got a chance to take a pause and go back to the drawing board to actually have those intentional conversations to figure out what engagement with the students would look like. So, for example, where a student would probably be coming into an office every day, now students were doing data internships, project management internships online, and then doing weekly check-ins online. For a lot of students, this was a new experience for them. I think for both industry and for schools, this was a new experience that they were navigating in, but it did show the ability to be adaptable in a space that might not have been the most convenient for both school or industry.
Yeah, and this really speaks to one of the points that's going to come up a little bit later, which is that, an internship in particular, it's not, the intern is not an employee. The experience is something in between having an employee and having a mentee or a student in front of you who's just there to learn. The student is not just there to learn, but they are there primarily to learn. And it's learning by doing, learning through exposure, learning through involvement, learning through skill building. And in the course of that skill building, they're also accomplishing things for you that further your mission, but they're really students first. And so, what you might expect in terms of scheduling and timeline and how much and how often to show up, those things are going to be different. There's obviously going to be a threshold below which you will, you'll have to say it's just not meaningful to have an intern here, for example, once a week, or to have an exam, or to have the intern come, 5 times a week, but a half an hour each time. You will have to take certain stands around, like, the experience itself gets significantly compromised unless we meet certain thresholds of involvement. But beyond that, that flexibility needs to be there because they are students and they're there to learn. And I guess the other thing I would say in addition to that is, and maybe it goes without saying, but this slide would apply just as much to the school as the partner, right? I would give this exact same message to the school and say, be flexible and adaptable to the extent that you can, because your partner is providing a learning experience for your students, but they are also trying to run a business or organization in the world. And that mission is very important to them. And yet this is not something that you can just sort of go thoughtlessly into and get in the way of that. You have to sort of understand their rhythms, their movements, sort of what their bottom lines are, and be able to adjust to those things. You too will have your thresholds beneath which it ceases to be meaningful. If the partner says, like, yeah, we can have an intern here, for a week in the summer, and the student needs more hours than that, or it's not possible to have a really rich experience in that environment in a week, you might need to push for a longer experience. Or if the partner says, yeah, we can have the site supervisor do one check-in with your student at the beginning of the internship and one check-in at the end, you can just come back and say, I know it's a draw on staff power, but really for the sake of the learning, more regular and deeper check-ins than that for the student would be really helpful.
So you touched on something, and I would want to say the word that I would probably want to include in this slide is grace. And I'm going to stick with your example. A check in with a student should not be the same as a check in with a full time employee. There's, and just in terms of equity, there's certain, they shouldn't be judged by the same measuring bar. For the employee that's coming in and you're doing a check in, I think we all know by definition, all of that is explained to us whenever we take on that employment, right? For a student who their primary place of function is, if not home, is at school, this is supposed to be a mock trial into the real world. And as such, I would just want industry partners to remember that the students they're not hired help. Their first primary goal of an internship is to learn, and part of that learning is for students to make mistakes, but then the other part of that internship is for you to give them feedback on the mistakes they're making, or where they're shining, but just to talk to them and let them know, and to to kind of walk them through certain things that they might experience once they've concluded the internship, or maybe down the road when they're actually in adulthood. So I would definitely want to throw the word grace in there, because industry partners do have the potential to not view the partnership, but I think view the students, to put them on the same level as employees, and we definitely don't want to do that. We want you, for example, just put yourself in the same mind frame of a 16 or 17-year old, and just have a little grace and understanding of why they weren't on time for work twice this week, or why they didn't call you to let you know, that they weren't going to be there at 9. These are things that you might have to walk them through to let them know why it's important. Build a long term relationship. Building a successful partnership takes time and effort. Make an effort to build a long term relationship with the school, and look for opportunities to expand and deepen your partnership over time. Building a long term relationship is the key to the success of any partnership. Industry partners should be committed to supporting students over the long term, rather than just providing a one time experience. And I think, not only in this presentation, but in other presentations, we usually mention that WBL, work based learning, is not just an internship, it's a series of experiences. And this is where your involvement comes in. To the industry partner that comes to the conversation and says, I need 30 people to do X, Y, and Z. This might be the opportunity for schools to stop the conversation and say, well, we'll get there, but this is who we're dealing with, and this is what we'd like to build out leading to the internship experience. This is why the conversations are so vital, and those conversations are going to be important into building that long-term relationship.
Yeah, and I would say, and this is going to come up later, but part of this is also, take an active interest in the school, an interest that goes beyond what are we doing, when are we doing it, what do you need us for? And the same goes for the school, right? I always advise schools to, if you really want a long-term relationship, treat it like a long-term relationship, which means, when there is not a work-based learning activity or a collaboration actively happening in the very moment, it is not the case that the partnership is dormant or on hiatus, or it's still there, and it warrants tending. It warrants some, some affection and some effort, and it needn't be huge amounts of effort. But schools, we talk about partner stewardship practices, right? Which is kind of like, you get students who get good news about college or about, some opportunity. Like, share that with your, like, guess what, the student who interned for you last summer just found out X, and invite them to, student performances and celebrative school events. Send them, make sure they're on your newsletter list. Send them, a handwritten note to thank them for something. These are things I feel like in I keep talking about culturally, the things that seem to be taking hold more and more in our day and age. And I think one of those things is this, I guess I understand it, in some ways I don't, but this emphasis, this relentless emphasis on efficiency. If it's not efficient, don't do it. If it's extra to the need, don't do it. But what's extra to the need between people, right? It's sort of like, are you going to just communicate with your partner as much as it takes to extract the service from them, and then everybody moves on? A lot of communication and a lot of elements of building a long-term relationship are, from a cold efficiency standpoint, quote unquote, extra to the need, but they're not extra to the need of really, just getting closer to each other as institutions, developing a partnership that really does feel close, that feels like a partnership, that feels like, that stokes your interest in being there for each other and doing things for each other, and collaborating more and more.
People spend more time with their coworkers than they spend more hours a day with their coworkers than they do with their families, or something like that. Have you ever heard that before?
I know, but I'm not surprised.
But this long-term relationship, you kind of have to treat it like you would a relationship with with a significant other. Um, if there's no attention, if there's no conversation, if there is no substance, then usually it's just going to remain dormant, or basically both parties are going to walk away. Um, Even if it's not a relationship, think about it as buying a plant. You love plants, right? And you buy the plant, you put it on your windowsill, expecting the sun to do all of the work, not realizing that, hey, sometimes it's going to take, maybe you might need to pull the shade down a little bit, and on occasion or every day you're going to need to water it. And what I'm saying is that if you want that plant to survive and to maintain life while it's in your care, you're going to do the best that you can do to make sure that it has everything that it needs. Um, if not, the only other option would be to buy a fake plant. I don't know, and I don't know if that's just in terms of long-term relationship, if that's going to do anything for you,
Hmm.
but with the plant we actually want to see it grow. um so building out that long-term relationship with your between the school and the industry, that's part of what it's going to take. It's going to take conversations, and please, and not all conversations are pleasant conversations, but they are conversations as long as no one is walking away from the table.
Well, and that's the thing about a long-term relationship is that when you build a long-term relationship, what one thing you end up doing is building capacity for hard conversations. A friend of mine used to refer, I don't like this metaphor because it's a money metaphor, but he used to refer to the kind of like, bonding that happens between friends and in your relationships as kind of like quote money in the bank for when things get hard. You learn about each other, you come to care for and respect each other. That means when things get hard, there's history there and there's understanding there. You're not just suddenly thrown into disagreement with this unknown quantity at the other side of the table. You have some basis for knowing each other, and therefore, ideally and theoretically, I think it's really true, a basis for getting through it, and dealing with it, directly and respectfully at the same time. Conflict and respect are
Hmm.
not mutually exclusive,
Right.
and they're particularly compatible and harmonious in the context of a long-term relationship.
Successful partnerships are built on collaboration and co-creation. As an industry partner, you should work with your school staff and administrators to co create meaningful learning experiences for students, share resources and expertise, and collaborate on problem solving and decision making. Once again, another element that is essential, but collaboration and co creation are going to be vital to the success of the partnership. And industry partners should work with schools to create programs and initiatives that meet the needs of everyone that is involved.
So that leads us into the next section of this session, which is 8 things that schools want industry partners to know. It may seem that this is a little redundant with the previous section. What's the difference between tips for new partners and things that schools want industry partners to know? These things are a little different. They're a little bit more intimate and they cut a little bit more to the heart of what schools have said about, God, I really wish a partner would understand this. The things that we just discussed in the tips section are included in that, and you'll probably see that some of the things in this section are going to sort of, in some ways, repeat what you just heard. But the reason why this section is important is because, for so many years, we have heard consistently from schools, um, and not, I should say, not necessarily in an antagonistic or complaining way. It's just kind of like, wow, if they knew what we knew, or if they knew what we're going through, or if they knew what our experience on the ground is, it would be so helpful to them in working with us. And so we wanted to apply that lens to the next set of ideas and suggestions. If you are an industry partner watching this, or if you are a school watching this and trying to get into the headspace of an industry partner. So we're actually not going to read all 8 of these aloud. We're going to go one by one through them, but for a moment, we'll just leave them up on the screen, so you can read them yourselves. I should say I want to thank International Community High School. Some of these items have come directly from them. We put a call out. We asked some colleagues about what, how they would answer the question, what do you want industry partners to know about your school? And we got some really insightful responses from international community high schools. So a lot of this content comes from them. A lot of it, as I said, comes from just years of observation and listening and being part of work-based learning programs. So take a moment and then we'll go into discussing them one by one. I think this one speaks in some ways to the previous slide about building a long-term relationship, but it is worded a little bit more personally. WBL is not the only, we don't expect you to be a WBL machine. We want you to be involved in a few different things, because the idea is that students are going to get meaningful contact with people out in the working world, and that will of course come through their WBL experiences. But it also happens when you come for student portfolio presentations one day, or you attend a student art exhibition one day. Those are, they're gonna mix and mingle with you then too, and it's really nice to be a force in their lives and in their school experience in more ways than one.
I like to think that uh, when we talk about more ways than WBL, it's just how you bring yourself into the space. A lot of industry partners, what I would want is for you to bring your authentic self to the school. I guess when you're even when you are meeting with the coordinators, but also when you're meeting with students, you're not just there to talk about the work. Because this, for example, the students are looking at you from a different lens, and a lot of them they're curious and they have questions on how you got to the space and position that you got to, even if you don't have the same shared experience as the students that you're speaking to. What you do have in common with a lot of high school students is that you were once in high school, and you may not, at that point, you may not have known what you wanted to be, or maybe you did know what you wanted to be at that point, and speak to the mind state that you were in and try to make that relatable to the students. Now, that part has everything to do with work-based learning. That part has everything to do with work-based learning and nothing to do with work-based learning at the same time. But what you're trying to do is build that connection between you, the school, and between you and the students, because the coordinator is also observing you, and the coordinator is saying, this is the type of person that I want to come back to my school.
Yeah. I would add, so I know somebody who randomly found herself having a conversation recently with the former president of Ecuador, who was speaking about a situation that he had been in. I won't go into detail, but in a nutshell, it involved, a situation that he was in where he was expected to lose a negotiation, or lose, like the chips were down, and it's like, yeah, he's not coming out of this with what he wants or needs. And it turned out that this kind of the rival, or the other party in this, who was expected to emerge victorious, just didn't. And the person I know said to him, like, how did you do that?
Mhm.
And his advice to her was, don't try to become a leader, try to become yourself.
Students have a lot going on in their lives, and school isn't the only area where they're striving. I think for me, this was a touchy one, just a little bit, because I think we as an adult, we as adults, we tend to, and sometimes rightfully so, because of the arenas that we see our students in. If they show up, we know they're okay, but we also we fail to realize sometimes that kids have a lot of things going on outside of school that can't be accounted for. Just for example, I don't know, during the pandemic, I don't know if you remember, but there was a report that came out, um, well, before the report, it was actually that all the students in New York City were going to be given iPads, so that they continue doing their work virtually. And they found that in the Bronx, iPads had gone missing. And part of the reason iPads had gone missing was because when the iPad was brought into the home, the iPad was actually being used by the other siblings to complete work, or the parents to do work. Um, I think initially when we gave out the iPads, or I say we, but when the iPads were given to them, it was for the students' use. But just recognizing that in the home there are a lot of things going on, and school might not be the priority. And that is a reality that I would hope that industry understands, that I would hope that schools understand, that sometimes school or the internship is not the number one priority. We want it to be, but I mean, I'm just speaking realistically. Sometimes they have a lot going on that keeps them from school, where they're not regular attenders. These are things that we have to be aware of, I think, and talk about during partnerships.
I agree. I think well, first of all, this first note about English language learners is really important, and we had been asked to include this. I think partly because it's something that consistently there have been, one or two partners who really didn't sufficiently appreciate what, how it's doing double and triple duty to both acquire a new language and acquire, like, learn as a student in school and in work-based learning in that language. So it's important that that's there too. I want to speak also to this third point about traumatic experiences. I think that because of the ethos that prevails in America of sort of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, I find that there are spaces in this society that are fairly compassionless. I think there are people who would say, um, traumatic experiences, what's the big deal? Everybody's got their sad stories. I would not say that, but I would venture to suppose that anyone who would say that is not only being insufficiently compassionate to the person or people experiencing or having had the difficult experience, they're also being insufficiently compassionate to themselves, right? I think it's in order to react coldly to somebody else's difficulty, you probably need to be the kind of person who's reacting coldly to your own. And we don't have to really go on at length about that. I think there are things that certainly end up sort of perpetuating certain cycles of harm there. But what I would say is that all of the mentors and the teachers that I've ever had who have been transformative for me have found a way to really, and they do this by sort of meeting me where I am and really observing me, have found a way to neither ignore my experiences of difficulty related to what they were teaching me or not, nor coddle me in the sense that, it's easy to be like, oh my God, people are going through difficult things. Don't give them anything they can't handle. Well, I mean, that can be infantilizing too. You don't want to so back up that you are treating the person or the student, whoever it is, as kind of like capable of less than they are capable of. So that sweet spot of like really having this trauma informed thinking about what are the experiences that this person is bringing. They may or may not be traumatic. Sometimes maybe they're just kind of juggling a lot, but then also understanding that 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 doesn't mean you have to stop challenging them or stop expecting things. Like high expectations is one of the, in a context like this, is one of the primary ways of respecting somebody and what they can do, but also just sort of be aware of the kind of the 360-degree view of what what they're living with through what their life is about as a person.
I think this would be a good place for industries to kind of pause, um, to remind themselves of what the culture of their organization is, and then ask the question, is this partnership something that I can really see myself investing in? You know what I mean? Um, I just think that at that moment, if you do know, because there are some industries that operate they operate themselves as being cold-hearted and it works for them, but as we're talking about as it relates to partnerships with schools, and we'd like you to understand, like, and this is where we're throwing in the words grace, compassion, and empathy. So I mean, I think if you can't include those words in your bucket list, then this might be a good time to pause, ask questions to see if this partnership is worth developing. Serving undocumented students is a complex issue as it involves legal, social, and economic considerations. Um, and I think what I have to say to that is this: as you're building out the partnership between school and industry, just remember that there's an equity issue, there's an equity challenge here. Understanding that all students can't be measured by the same parameter. It's impossible, because there are some students who will be ready for the experiences, there are some students who will be ready for the internships, but then there are students who have issues with documentation or getting documentation, and for them that is the goal, or that will be the goal. That will be the primary goal, I guess, within the first year. So, for example, while some students might be experiencing career exploration or job shadowing, there are students who are undocumented that we might need to build out different type of activities, or forget activities altogether and just come up with a plan on how we can get them documentation. Um, all of that to say that I think the plan is going to be different for students depending on what bucket you fill in. And with undocumented students, I don't want to sit for this conversation and pretend that we can talk about activities and internships in the same way that we would talk about them with other students.
Yeah, I would say, and I think this especially maybe resonates with the organizations, the partners out there who prize things like innovation and creativity, because it's entirely possible to serve undocumented students in a like high quality, meaningful, career preparatory way. It just requires some creativity. It may require kind of like thinking in a different way, which I know is a value that a lot of organizations have, thinking outside of the box. Well, think outside of the documentation here. That's an important thing to do. And then the other thing I would say is really for me, what it comes down to is just kind of follow the school's lead on this, right? Take your cue from them. This is they know what they're doing. They have really committed themselves to serving their students, and they will likely be in a position to kind of help guide you through serving undocumented students with work-based learning, and help kind of collaborate and kind of come up with workarounds where they're necessary with you. Just take your cue from them, because they got this, and you got this too.
Parents care, but often do not know the full landscape of careers and industries available to their children. For me, what rings out of this slide is just that through the partnership between schools and industry, I would hope that as a part of this conversation, we are trying to figure out, or at least trying to figure out how to market or brand what information looks like for parents, just in terms of internships and WBL experiences. I think this is a great opportunity and a great space for both to sit down and not only think about students as the stakeholder, but also think about parents, because parents are ultimately going to give that push to students to buy into the work-based learning experience and into the internship. In order for that, because what ends up happening is that the coordinator finds themselves being the parent, the in-school parent, where they have to do all of the pushing, where they have to do all of the promoting. And a lot of this can be done from the parent side if they did have an understanding of what work-based learning experiences their child will be partaking in, but then also what internships what value internships have for their students. This is something I think can be built out at the table in that conversation between the industry and school leadership.
And the parents, the industry and the school and the parents, right?
Yes.
Oftentimes the school is the kind of the middle person who relays information back and forth between the parents and the industry partner. There's no reason not to get everybody together around the same table. I generally agree with you, Larry. I'm a little bit wary of concepts like branding and marketing, only because I want to avoid the idea that what we're doing is selling something to the parents. Like, because what that does in some ways, not always, but in some ways, that creates this mentality that, like, the parent is the barrier to something happening. And if we can only remove that barrier, then the student will have this opportunity. Like, the parent is a key player in the student's life, right? And
Hmm.
so you never know what their misgivings are saying, what they're representing. If they're like, hang on, I don't know if I agree with this experience, yeah, it could be that they need more information. It could be like, it could be any number of things. And so rather than going in with this hard sell, it's as so many other things we've been talking about, it's a conversation. It involves listening. Like, what are you really concerned about? And there are some things they'll say that you can address easily. Oh, that concern, here's what we can say about that concern that can hopefully reassure you. And then there are some concerns that it may not be in your power to address. And so then the question becomes, what do we do? What do we're at a standstill.
Right.
Can we think together about getting through this? Or can we think, it may be the case that an alternative work-based learning opportunity will be necessary. It could be that, for example, the student has to babysit their younger sibling at certain times, and this work-based learning activity like really, really conflicts in an unavoidable and immovable way with those family commitments. In that case, it's not realistic to say, well, hire a babysitter. No, no, not everyone can do that or wants to do that. But maybe it's the case, like, can the can the industry partner be flexible, to our earlier point about flexibility, about the hours of the opportunity? And if they can't, is there another kind of work-based learning activity available to the student? All of which is to say, this is a parent saying, like, hang on, is not a call to kind of, and I know you're not saying this, Larry. I'm just, it put this in my mind,
No.
and I think it warrants saying, is not an invitation to kind of bulldoze the parent into agreeing. It's an invitation to a conversation, and in some ways a more fruitful one than maybe you were even expecting going in.
An internship should balance adding value or benefit for you with prioritizing a student's learning. Interns should have latitude to make the kinds of mistakes as employees might not make as much or as often. And I think I was speaking to that a little bit earlier, just in saying this is where the word grace comes in. We don't want to hold them to the same measure as you would an employee. This is the opportunity where they're learning. I think with an employees, there is a learning curve when you just started a new job as an employee, and usually you have, like, what is it, 2 weeks, a month, or 3 months. um you have these interns for whether it's a few weeks or a few months, but they're there primarily to learn. And for some internships, even if there is a paycheck attached to it, I think I would want us to get out of that mindset of, well, I'm paying you to do a job, because that's not it. You are paying them, and you are going to find tasks for the students to do, yes, but I want us to also remember that this is where we start implementing the learning part of all of this. There should be parts where you're stopping and you're actually teaching. So
Yeah.
just as there are priorities and tasks that you need to adhere to, you also need to put stop points in where you can have conversation to either say how things are going, um, see if there's anyone that needs to be involved in the process. Is there
Yeah.
anything that we need to do differently? But there should be some pauses in between there for some conversations of learning.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't want to belabor this slide too much. I know we spoke a lot about these ideas earlier. The only thing I feel like I can add right here, because it's present in this slide and it wasn't as present in some, some of the earlier ways in which this idea came up, is this last point here about menial tasks. And menial, I should say, is in quotations, because we know that nothing is menial. Everything needs to get done. Every task that has to happen for the next task or for other tasks to happen is an important task. What we mean by menial is kind of mostly rote or manual, or mostly kind of like done in an isolated way, done in a vacuum, done where there's sort of no obvious connection to the work of the organization. There's no necessarily skill building for the person trying to prepare to enter the field. Sort of paper shredding is one of those things that comes up, right? If you put somebody in a basement to shred paper, like, how is that preparing
I've
them
done that.
for that field? And granted, it may be a thing that needs doing, but I think our point here is that those tasks are not sort of universally off limits for internships, especially since you're not going to bring a high school intern in to kind of like be a paralegal, or to kind of like you know assist in dental surgery. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff they're not going to be able to do because they're at the very, very beginning of their learning journey. But
Mhm.
this is why it's so important to make sure, if you are asking them to do things, that it's like, hey, we really need help with this thing, but it's not a very like high skilled, like high impact thing, then make sure it's situated in the context of other kinds of tasks, other kinds of roles. And that, to your point, Larry, other kinds of teaching, right? Like, stop and teach, stop and show, stop and offer an opportunity to kind of look around. This is how this part that you're doing, isolated though it may seem, is related to all these other parts of the operation here.
And I know we don't want to belabor this, but I will say this much. I think a menial task can come about when there's no explanation. And as we're
Context, yeah.
no context. And as we're talking, I mean, and who hasn't seen the Karate Kid? If you've seen the first Karate Kid and you think about when Mr. Miyagi was having Daniel-san wash cars, and he kept washing cars and he had to paint the fence. And
Hmm.
in the beginning, he got so frustrated because there was no context as to why he was doing it. He got frustrated to the point that he went to Mr. Miyagi, his employer, um, to say, "Hey, I don't want to do this anymore. Why do you have me doing this? I came here to learn karate." And the whole
Hmm.
time he was teaching him karate, and that was the context that he needed to say, okay, you know what, maybe I do want to be here. So to your point, I think a menial task is when you tell someone, go do this, and there's nothing behind it. There's no
Hmm.
context or explanation as to why you're doing it. It's okay not to know how to present to a group of students, even if you present to colleagues every day. um this one, and I think I was alluding to it earlier in terms of being your authentic self, but also the example that you used as well. Instead of being a leader, be the best you, be yourself. And sometimes that can be hard. It's not the easiest thing to do, but just you do have to remind yourself that, yes, when you step into these spaces, you have to be aware of your audience, even if you're used to just dealing with your colleagues on a day-to-day basis, and you don't meet with students on a day-to-day basis. Being yourself brings more to the table than you might realize. And what I mean by that is putting yourself in front of a room of students, and if you make a mistake and the students call you on it, own the mistake, or let them know that, hey, this is my first time meeting with students, or just being yourself. And if you're awkward, be awkward, but you have to own it in order for them to believe you. Whether you're awkward, whether you're good at this, bad at this, but you just have to be yourself. You have to be the best self that you can be when you step into the spaces of presenting to groups of students.
Yeah, this one comes up a lot, and it's honestly, it's one of the hardest things
It's very
sometimes
hard.
for schools to talk about, because the elephant in the room is we have this partner who is a brilliant lawyer or brilliant engineer or, whatever the case may be, but, half the students are asleep. Like this is a snooze fest. And it's just, there's an almost painful sense of kind of mismatch between what the message is and who's there hearing it. And this doesn't happen in every, it's an example, but there are just as many partners, if not more partners, who really know how to lead an engaging experience and be very interactive in that way. What I would say is that, in my experience, if a partner is able to put themselves a little bit into, what we call beginner's mind, right? This idea that, and particularly if you are a giant in your field and you've been doing this forever and ever, whatever it is you're doing, you're pretty accustomed to being an expert. You're pretty accustomed to being the one who knows how to do the thing. It is important to try to cultivate in the midst of that beginner's mind for a couple of reasons. Number one, it helps you understand so much more what student interns are going through, particularly if it's been years, if not decades, since you were last in a position where your learning curve was that steep. But then also it kind of, it opens you up to the idea that you yourself are still a learner. And that's okay. Everybody's always learning. And that just means that, if it's time to accept some help and guidance from the school, like what makes for a really effective talk in our classrooms, accept that guidance, accept it willingly. Some of it will be old hat, some of it will be stuff you already know. But also just trust that the school, they've been doing this a long time. They understand their craft just as well as you understand yours. And so, be open to that.
I think too, as you're talking, all I keep thinking to myself is, and once again, this is it comes up as a part of the conversations that you're having with schools. If I'm industry before I meet with a group of students, fill me in on what I'm about to walk into.
Yeah.
Let me know what this group of students are like. I mean, if your school has three different types of students, and I've seen in certain schools, group A, like they'll tell them like, okay, these are our upbeat kids, you shouldn't have any issues. They love to ask questions, they're engaging. Um, I can go in there and I might present to those students one way, versus at the end of the day, when you say, well, these are not our most engaging students, it's the end of the day, I might have to go back and revamp how I approach. Because if I walk into the room the same way I did in the morning, um, I think I'm going to be looking at a lot of faces just asking, hey, can I get out of here? Or can I go home?
Yeah, and I'll give you an example, a really good example. I worked at a school with a law and justice theme, and there was a guest speaker series called Lunch with Lawyers, where different kinds of lawyers from different walks of the legal profession would come in and just lead a roundtable, brown bag lunchtime discussion with students. And we had this, I believe he was a law professor and he taught real estate law. And he called me and he said, what am I going to do with the group? I think it might have been 10th graders. Fortunately, he was the kind of person who kind of like, he had this humility. He
Mhm.
asked for help. He said, I'm terrified. I teach real estate law. Like, what's in real estate law for a group of 10th graders? And, I said to him, look, here's what we find works well. And I gave him a few different kind of pointers, like, don't try to cover, it's an hour, less than an hour. Don't try to cover whole volumes of case law. Pick an easy, identifiable concept or idea and stick with it, right? Go deep with something rather than try to cover a lot of things broadly. Choose something that's timely and may, resonate with or reflect what students have experienced or maybe are aware of in society and the culture.
Mhm.
um, Make sure that there's some ambiguity as far as right and wrong. Or don't make sure, but you might like, there should be some cognitive dissonance there in terms of like, wait, what should be done here? What is the right thing? It's not clear cut. And after I gave him those pointers, he said, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about eminent domain in the context of the Brooklyn Rail Yards project, which is where they built that arena. What's the name of that arena in at
Barclays?
Atlantic? Barclays. Yeah. So they built before the Barclays Center was built. It was this piece of land, some of which was undeveloped, some of which had apartments and businesses, and eminent domain. This idea that we can pretty much commandeer this property and ask you to leave if it's for some kind of like public benefit was being invoked, and people were saying, hang on, is this really eminent domain? And he put this question before the students, and it was one of the best guest speaker sessions we ever had, from this like real estate lawyer who was terrified that he was going to be dry and uninteresting.
We welcome your curiosity about our school, our students, our community, and more. I mean, I think we've been talking about that through the whole presentation. When you enter the space, be curious. Be curious about the culture of the school. Be curious about the mission. Be curious about the students who attend the school. Be curious about the interest of the students. Be curious about the staff that you're having conversations with. Just remembering that this is not your space. This is not the industry space. This is the school, and you want to immerse yourself. You want to be a seen face so that students will feel comfortable with you, so staff will feel comfortable with you. This is how you build that meaningful long relationship. This is how you make that relationship real.
Yeah, I would say, I feel like a little bit of a broken record here, but with so many points we've made in speaking to industry partners, I would say this to schools as well. Be curious about the partner, be curious about the working environments you walk into. The work-based learning is not just for the students, it's for you. When you're on a work site visit, you're bound to learn as much as the students are when you're there. So be open to that. I think that for partners in schools alike, and here I go again, sort of singing that song of like, this is who we're becoming as a society. And not to overgeneralize, but I think it's safe to say that people are getting sort of busier and busier and busier, and we're being sort of pummeled with more and more and more information. And in the context of that, my experience of the people around me is that there's often this weird unspoken assumption that there's no time to be curious. Curiosity is a luxury that I don't have. I have to just focus on like this thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. It's just this kind of like put your head down and get through it. And there's so much about the work you're there to do, and about life in general, that will be missed, if curiosity is kind of jettisoned, or if it is surplused, if it's kind of like oh, this is an extra thing we don't need.
The only thing that I'm going to add to that is, as mentioned in the slide, we may disagree on some matters, but mutual curiosity will help us hold steady, find compromise, and do our best for students. Conversations are not, I don't think that conversations are meant to be yes, 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 I agree. I think at times there are going to be conversations where we don't agree on things, but it's supposed to promote conversation. It's supposed to promote dialogue so that we can create something new or figure out what the best solution is. So don't be afraid of difficult conversations where everyone might not agree on things. That's actually a good thing if you're willing to still stay in the room and have those uncomfortable conversations. Finding or developing quality work-based learning experiences is extremely difficult.
This is such an important one for so many reasons. First of all, I've worked in career and technical education for a number of years, and I remember working with some folks, I believe, at the Partnership for New York City, which was this kind of, they were devoted to these cross-sector partnerships between corporate partners, partners in multiple sectors with, education and other human service fields. And one thing that came up constantly in those conversations at that time was this idea that in Europe, no employer needs to be convinced that A, they have a role to play in the development of the future workforce, and B, it's a role they should play. There is just in countries, other than ours, there very much often is a culture of like, employers participate in the cultivation of um, the people coming up into the workforce. That's not so much the case in America. I mean, it might be starting to turn around, but it's just, when schools find an industry partner, it's just this kind of rare and special thing. And even, there are schools that have kind of one large anchor industry partner that they work with exclusively. I don't think that's necessarily the best model, but then there are schools that have like multiple smaller partners, which enables you to kind of spread out the commitments a little bit more. But in either scenario, rarely have I ever seen a school that is able to meet all of its work-based learning needs with its partners. And it's because, partners are doing a lot, but they also, where is the school that can get every single senior and junior into an internship? Where is that school? Like, I haven't met that school yet. Or maybe they exist, but they have a kind of a small senior class or whatever the case may be. But this is all to say, it's so hard to find employer partners, period, but certainly good employer partners. So I think one thing that schools would ask of industry partners is to help spread the word, help recruit other partners. You're their colleagues, they'll listen to you. So that's one thing worth saying here. And I would say the other thing that I want to add here, because good partners are so special and so rare, there's often this kind of mentality, explicit or not, sometimes it's just unconscious, that like, oh my God, we have this great partner, we have to keep them because they're the only gig in town, or they're the only ones who have the resources to partner with us. And so, you know, there ends up being this dynamic of kind of like treading really lightly, either not asking for what's needed or asking for it, but kind of like really soft pedaling communication about what's needed or what's difficult. I don't know about you, but I think, if I were on the receiving end of this as a partner, I would start thinking to myself, like, come on, guys, what's going on? Like, you don't have to be this careful. Like talk to us like real people. We're not the great and powerful Oz. Like, you don't have to depict everything as sunny to us. Like, let's have multiple real conversations. I think there is, for some schools, not all, a very real fear that kind of, I don't want to say airing the dirty laundry, but just being kind of upfront about a lot more things is going to jeopardize a relationship that they cannot afford to lose. And so I think just having, as a partner, just understanding that, knowing that's in the mental calculus sometimes of a school-based staff person when they're talking to you, just helps you be a little bit more sensitive to those dynamics and what a school is going through when they're trying to recruit, retain, and collaborate with good partners.
I mean, I agree with you. I think that with every great partnership, everyone wants to put their best foot forward. You think about it in sports when people make trades, everyone wants to make sure that what they're the person that's being traded, they're going to they're going to elaborate on all of the positive qualities to let them know what they're getting. Um, Sometimes not realizing that for the teams that are actually doing the trading, we have our scouts where we know what the maximum potential is for this person. We know what their positive attributes are. We know what their negatives are too. And we might have taken all of that into consideration because we said, you know what? This positive attribute is so great that I still want this person on my team. But if you try to hide something, that's when you look at it and you go, well, why aren't they telling me this information? Like, I need to know this. And what I would hate to happen is that you wait till something happens, for example, on an internship, a student gets sent to an internship and something negative happens, or maybe something that the industry sees as negative, and then we come back to the table and it's like, well, I didn't know that that was the type of student that I was. And I'm not trying to in any way paint a negative light on our students. What I'm saying is that we try to meet students where they are, but I think to our what we need to do to our benefit is that we have to be willing to have that conversation. But as industry, we might also have to realize that there are schools who might not ask the question.
Yeah.
They might not be upfront about the question, And it might take a push from you to say, hey, can you tell us about your students? Are there things that we should be concerned about? Are there things that we should look out for?
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, there are schools that, even when asked directly, may kind of skirt the question or be really, really careful in how they choose to answer. And
Mhm.
it's not because they're concerned necessarily about their students. They love their students and their students are perfectly lovable. It's that there is a, in the kind of the world of work, there is such a premium placed on this idea of professionalism, and it has come to mean so many things, real and imagined. It has also come, frankly, to be applied in ways that are racist, sexist, in ways that are, it's meant to stand in for things that some people have and some people don't. So I think that concept in and of itself can certainly stand to be interrogated and updated. But all of this is to say that, you know, there are a lot of working environments that don't tolerate people being people. And teenagers often are people being people. And it could be in messier ways than a company would be used to or would be perfectly comfortable with. And I think there are schools that just kind of will say to them, to be perfectly frank, that will say to themselves, like, this partner doesn't get it. They don't get it in this way. And so I either have to withhold information or I have to send them only my most polished students, in which case there are students who could really benefit from the work-based learning and just aren't getting it because there's this weird expectation hanging in the air about who the partner is and what they want. So, I would say if you kind of like feel this sort of what's not being said, the school isn't trying to lie to you or put one over on you. I think in some ways they're trying to manage your expectations, or they're trying to manage your experience. And in some ways it's on them, right? On some ways it's sort of like an, oh, this school is, they're treading very lightly because they don't want to lose this partnership. In some ways it might be on you. In some ways it may be that the school has clocked you as a partner that, isn't naturally predisposed toward or experienced with or knowledgeable about or interested in working with students who are people being people. And so they're dancing around that a little bit. So I think that's worth thinking about as well. We are pretty much at the end of this session. Larry and I spoke when we first put the session together, and we came up with we compiled the tips for new partners and the things that schools want partners to know. We thought, we can't end it there. There are other things to be said. There's a sort of a note that we really want to end on that ties all of this together. And really what we came up with is this idea that is palpable throughout the session in the other slides. Sometimes it's very explicit, sometimes it's very implicit. That like relationship building is, what they call an art and a science. Whenever this, if you're unfamiliar with this expression, it's an expression that means whatever it is you're doing, whatever this thing is that we're talking about has technical dimensions. Like as long as you're trained, you can learn how to do it, and anyone can learn how to do it. And then it has stylistic dimensions that are like, it's not necessarily trainable. It's sort of more a matter of instinct or judgment or whatever the case may be. It's more you do it by feel. It can be trained, but it's a different set of instincts than just saying like, here are the technical notes to hit. And we set it up front in the very beginning when we said, kind of like plan out have regular communication, and that also, leaves room for spontaneity and collegiality. That precisely was a way of saying relationship building is an art and a science. There are science things and there are art things that go into this. And so this is kind of the note we want to leave off on. There's a couple things. This is, again, like every list we give you, these are not exhaustive, and you can, you may choose to make completely different lists than we do. But when we were thinking about what is science and what is art in relationship building, the first thing that came to mind is communication, right? Like you can say like communicate by these modes and with this kind of frequency. Some of that is very, very technical and can be, mastered somewhat easily. The art of it is kind of the tone and judgment piece, right? Like that's kind of goes to what we spoke about earlier when communication is both political and not. Like you be honest, be yourself, but also be aware of your audience. Like there's no way to really communicate that in any kind of technical manual or training. You learn it by feel. Um, so yeah, so communication was sort of the first thing we thought of that has science and art dimensions to it.
Yeah, I think the science is that is determining, like Joe said, the type and frequency of the communication. With the art, I think it's up to you to determine what that communication looks like. If you're able to communicate in your own tone, your own style, and at your own frequency outside of the scheduled frequency of communication. For example, if something comes up and you just want to touch base with your industry partner, and you're able to do that by sending a quick email, if that's the mode of conversation, and say, hey, just checking in to see how things are going, the unexpected. I think that falls under the pile of art, right? You know
Yeah,
what I'm
and
saying?
I would say one thing that what you're saying is making me realize is that a lot of the things that fall under the column of art may, not will, may feel a little weird because I think the kind of the scriptedness of interactions in schools and workplaces, the kind of the things that often are the most explicit ideas pointed to, for example, in the scope of a performance review, have to do with the technical pieces. You ticked all these boxes or you didn't. The things that are art are just sort of more like, I'm gonna end this email to a partner with a joke. Who does that? I mean, is it appropriate? Is it right? Maybe. Like you kind of know the relationship best. I had a partner, he was a managing partner at a law firm, a partner to my school. He and I bonded over um, a mutual deep love of metaphors. And on the first anniversary of our partnership with this school and the law firm, I gave him a framed copy of the cover of The Onion that has a pit that had, I don't know if you've ever seen it, it had a picture of the Titanic,
Hmm.
and the headline said, "World's largest metaphor sinks in the North Atlantic."
Hmm.
And he loved it. It was like, I kind of took the initiative to do this kind of like weird, funny thing. Another law partner, I gave a plush alligator to, with a name tag that said like litigator, because she was the top litigator in her firm. In the context of our relationship, it just worked and it just kind of deepened that understanding, but it's also like not the kind of thing that comes up in a performance review or that people technically think of as their job.
Well, I think that's where it is. So the science of it, the science in the communicating is that you're communicating just to communicate. The art is where you get to be yourself in that
Mm-hmm.
communication, without feeling like, oh my gosh, did I go overboard? Well, no, you can't really go overboard if you're being yourself.
Yeah.
Being yourself and being yourself within context. So to your example, you guys related on something, and then you were able to still be yourself and relate that through communication. And I think it speaks well to what I would have hoped would be a good relationship moving forward. I don't know whether or
Yeah.
not it was long or short, but it speaks to that. So for science, meetings that have specific purposes and agenda, and then meetings that feel creative, energetic, and collaborative. And I think with a lot of this, Joe, as we're going through it, there are things that fall under science that are going to fall under art as well. Everything that falls under science is kind of like, hey, I gave you 8 crayons and I need you to use them to do, I don't know, something. And if you're an imaginative person, you're going to come up with something different every time. You know what I mean? We know that the meetings are supposed to happen, and we know what the purpose and the agendas are for the meetings, right? But there are spaces in your meetings for you to be creative. And it doesn't only have to be one tone, right?
Yeah.
And even if I'm creating the meeting, let's say I am industry and I'm creating the meeting, I can also collaborate with my school partners on, hey, how do you think that the meeting should go? Because, we want you guys to be engaged in this. We want you to be involved. Like, we want this to go off well. What do you think we should do? Like, what is your staff like? Like, what are your students like? Just having those conversations to figure out, okay, how can we be creative in this
Yeah.
space? Anything that you can do in that nature, I think is going to speak to the art of building that relationship.
Yeah, and to your point, the point that you made yesterday, Larry, when we were talking about this, you said that that's what's going to make the difference between the meeting you look forward to and the meeting you don't.
That's right. I mean, there's some meetings that show up on your calendar that you just go, oh my gosh, this again, because you know that maybe you're just a bystander in the meeting and, as opposed to an active participant. But then there are other meetings that you look forward to because they don't feel like meetings. And maybe we need to find a new word for them. What you want to do is you don't want to create that negative connotation by hearing the word meeting.
Yeah.
You want that even if you're going to use the word meeting, that people they know you and there's an expectation that okay, you know what, whatever this is going to be digestible. Under science, asking relevant questions about their institution, and for art, asking questions that show you're interested. And for me, once again, this is more like checking boxes. Asking something because I have to ask it versus asking something because I'm actually interested in learning. This is where you
Hmm.
put yourself in a space of learning.
Hmm.
Once again, and I think that's the art behind it as opposed to the science.
Yep, I completely agree.
Giving relevant information about your school and students versus giving information that makes people feel engaged and taken care of. Relevant information about your school and students are things that can be found on a website. The demographics of your school, male to female ratio, those type of things will let you know, I guess, the size of the school that you might be walking into. But they're not
Yeah, the
gonna
curricular focus and
yeah,
what extracurriculars we have, and
right.
what our career pathways are.
Yeah, but the art of it is actually finding out about the students that you're going to be engaged with is saying, hey, what type of students do you have? Like, do they prefer more activity or do they prefer more dialogue? Finding out what their interests are so you can craft something and meet them at some sort of middle ground.
Yeah, I remember talking to a partner about the school that I was working at, and I said, he asked some question about what the school was like, what the tone of the school was, and I told him this story. I said, what's interesting is that there was a new ninth grader who came in halfway through the year and was put in his advisory, and for the first couple weeks, I don't know what school he had come from, but it was an environment in which he learned that he had to kind of be tough if he wasn't going to get eaten alive. And so he was just kind of destroying the culture of the advisory and kind of, as they say in dating, he was like negging everybody. He was just kind of like being a bit of a jerk. And it was so roundly rejected that 2 or 3 weeks after his arrival, he came to advisory and he was like, look, everybody, can I start again? Can I try again? And they said, yeah, of course. And he did. And he was the sweetest kid in the world.
Yeah.
But this isn't information that would be on a website about my school, but it's something that it was a little slice of life. It was a little vignette that I relayed to this partner to kind of communicate this thing about a tone of how community is being built
Yeah.
in this place. So at the end of the day, with all of the things that we've talked about in mind, there's still going to be, there's going to be difficulty. There's going to be, misunderstanding, miscommunication, misconnection. But really, I think more than anything else, what we hope brings you, and when I say you, I'm talking to the partner and the school, right? The last slides about the science and art of relationship building, we had sort of switched modes and gone from speaking directly to partners more toward speaking to work-based learning coordinators. But I'm speaking to both of you here. Really, at the heart of the work that you're doing is the same person or the same people, right? I mean, the way that you, the work-based learning coordinator, serve your students, you have something in mind that you want to do for them. It is earnest, it is pure, it is honorable. And the same goes for the partner. You have something that you want to do for them, and you think it's going to get them somewhere, and you hope it's going to help them develop themselves in the direction they want to go, and you're there to give that too, right? And so you have a common interest. You're not really there at cross purposes. You're there for sort of the same purpose. You're just kind of adding different ingredients to the recipe. So hopefully that can be a stabilizing reminder when things get tough.
And of course, help is here if you need it. Whether it's our timely professional learning and development sessions, our direct one on one or small group coaching, or just answering any of your questions on a need basis, please feel free to reach out to us. You can reach out to me, Larry Fleming Williams, at lflemingwilliams@schools.nyc.gov, or Desmond Jardine at djardine@schools.nyc.gov, and we can answer any question that you may have. Once again, thank you for joining us for our work based learning professional development learning series. All information, including the PowerPoint presentation, will be made available, and you can reach out to us if you need access to our recording or our PowerPoint presentation. We thank you, and we look forward to you joining us next time. Take care.